Hello, everyone. I'm David Evans from Yale University, and on behalf of my co-authors, I'm pleased to present some reconnaissance data, some preliminary data from a reconnaissance field season from 2019, and where we worked just to the northeast of the Naukluft nappes and found paleomagnetic results that to us suggest a 30-degree vertical axis rotation of the Rehoboth basement inlier. Acknowledging my co-authors, as well as the assistance provided from Namibia and internationally. The Rehoboth Inlier, shown here in pink color in the central part of Namibia, is part of the northwestern edge of the Kalahari Craton, and it is semi-contiguous in the subsurface to the Ganzi Ridge in northern Botswana, forming what's known as the Kalahari Copper Belt. The Naukluft nappes are at this structural syntaxis of the Kalahari Craton coming into the Damara and Charib origins. And to the south of the Naukluft is an area I'll be referring to later, which is sometimes given the name as Conkeep terrain, sometimes given the name as the Sinclair region. But our data presented here are just from the Rehoboth Inlier, south of Windhoek. As we're all familiar in Namibia, the satellite images show the structure very well, coming out of the Damara origin at the latitude of Windhoek through the southern marginal zone, which represents the ancient Kalahari Craton margin, and into this uplifted basement inlier around the town of Rehoboth, which exposes Paleo to Mesoproterozoic rocks, only weakly deformed and metamorphosed by the Damara orogeny. And then to the south of that, we have the Naukluft nappes, structurally overlying the sedimentary cover that extends upward stratigraphically into the Nama Basin. The geological maps of the area show the geology of the Rehoboth basement inlier as largely exposed to the west of the town of Rehoboth and largely covered with sand and soil to the east of the town of Rehoboth. And I'll be presenting data today from two field areas, one in the Bitterwater area near the town of Doordebus, and one farther to the southwest from the area around Sumis, just east of the Kleinaub copper district. Stratigraphy of these two areas was worked out at least as far back as the 1980s, where we have a bimodal volcanic association in both areas, overlain by red beds with subordinate volcanics. Our samples come from that volcanic association in the Bitterwater area and from the overlying red beds in the Sumis area. The age constraints for these two successions are in various stages of publication. In the northeastern part of the Rehoboth, the rhyolitic formation of the Longberg, just east of the town of Rehoboth, has been dated by uranium lead by Becker at 1100 million years, and it's considered to be in a succession that includes the Opdam basalts. This would be an association that links the volcanism here in northeastern Rehoboth Inlier with the Umkondo large igneous province throughout all of Kalahari, but also in particular the Kagwebe rhyolites in the Ganzi-Chobe belt of northern Botswana. To the west of the Rehoboth Inlier, there's a succession of rhyolites that for a time were considered possibly equivalent to the rhyolites that were subsequently dated at 1100, but now uranium lead geochronology shows them to be older at about 1225 million years. And then there is a succession, the red bed succession I alluded to earlier, ever since at least Charlie Hoffman's synthesis in 1989. The Doornpoort formation and the rest of the Tsumis group has been linked with rifting of the northern Kalahari margin at around 800 million years, with this 820 million year age suggested from correlation to mafic dikes with a rubidium-strontium age from the early 1990s at about 820 million years. Now, in addition to these two areas of Rehoboth, there is the Sinclair region to the south, which has also volcanic dominated successions overlain unconformably by red beds. In this case, it's the red beds of the Auberus Formation. And for many years, the Auberus Formation has been linked stratigraphically through correlation with the similar association of red beds overlying volcanics. You have the Doornpoort Formation. However, about 5 years ago, my lab group was involved with a geochronology study in which we dated dikes at the end of this intermediate position volcanic event. We found a zircon age of 1105 million years. And we also found paleomagnetically that the Auberus Formation has the same direction essentially as the post-Grouperous dikes, suggesting that this unconformity does not represent a lot of time. So this sets up the current study in which we will test the correlation of the Auberus Formation with the Doornpoort Formation, and therefore test this question about whether the Doornpoort Formation really is related to 820 million year rifting. So for paleomagnetic studies, many of you in the audience are not familiar with what we do, but we involve, our work involves sampling, commonly with a rock drill so that we can orient the cores that we collect in both azimuth and vertical inclination, so that when we take them back to the cores back to the laboratory, we can cut them into right cylinders, and each of which contains its orientation mark, so that when we insert it into our magnetometer in the laboratory at Yale University, we can measure the magnetic directions of rocks that don't normally seem to be visibly or tangibly magnetic. We can measure the magnetization of even what seem like non-magnetic rocks. And then we represent the data on these plots. The left-hand plot is unique to paleomagnetism. It's like looking at a Picasso painting where you see the front of somebody's face at the same time as you see the side of their face. So it's two orthogonal projections of the same data in the two colors. And then we can also plot the data in terms of a stereo net, which is the same as what you find in structural geology, except that in paleomagnetism, we can show both the lower hemisphere and the upper hemisphere on the same plot. And I'll be referring to a lot of data in this talk that have a shallow south-southwest direction of magnetization. And what we hope to find in these plots, if you're not used to looking at them, are straight lines that decay to the origin after successive partial demagnetization runs in the laboratory. And one straight line indicates a very nicely determined vector of magnetic remnants, hopefully from when the time when the rock formed, although it could be from a later time as well. And the astonishing thing for me about this preliminary data set from samples collected 2 years ago is that what we found were from each of these two areas, Bitterwater and Zumas, we collected the samples around a fold structure. I expected all the folding to be Damaran in age, but what we found was that this characteristic southwest and shallow direction is observed at not present day geometry and not completely restored geometry, but actually at about 60% of fraction of unfolding of the strata toward horizontal. And what we're looking at is a measure, this K value is a measure of the clustering of the data at various levels of unfolding, from 0%, that's today's field coordinates, to 100% where the strata are all rotated completely to horizontal. And for both the up-down basalts in the Bitterwater area around Dordobus and in the Zumas area of the Doornpoort red beds, we found this sort of 60% maximum clustering value of unfolding. And so these are two independent tests that suggest that the magnetization was acquired during folding of the strata. And actually, this it really caught my eye because 5 years ago, my lab group found a similar relationship in the Sinclair area, where in the Aubrus Formation, the maximum unfolding was again at right around 55, in this case, 55% unfolding of the strata. And so now we have a magnetization that is determined to be and documented to be acquired by the rocks as they're being folded. And as I mentioned before, I expected that all of the folding would be Damaran in age. However, when you convert the data into positions of the inferred paleomagnetic pole or the inferred rotation axis relative to the field sites, we find that the magnetic directions are farther away, they're lower inclination, that means closer to the paleoequator, than any of the suggested positions of the pole, the Cambrian pole relative to Kalahari. And so this Cambrian parent polar wander path with all of these circles are showing the 95% uncertainty on the results. And these derive not only from Africa, but also from contiguous places in Gondwanaland, but from the lowest Cambrian up through the middle to upper Cambrian, the path generally follows this trend. And we find that our data are a little bit farther away from this trend than would have been expected. So the inclinations are too shallow. However, the inclinations and the distances between the sites and the inferred pole position are comparable to what we find from these earlier studies of the Aubrus and the post-Gupperus dikes in the Sinclair area, as well as the well-known Mkondo large igneous province in the Kalahari proper and the red beds of the Kalkpunt Formation near the Orange River near Uppington. So now the interesting further aspect of this is that whereas the Sinclair region had pole positions which are right in line with autochthonous Kalahari, suggesting that the concave terrain was in fact contiguous with Kalahari at 1100 million years, our data are systematically rotated clockwise. And so if we restore that rotation with by about 30 degrees. So you can see the Rehoboth as a block here that's now rotated 30 degrees anti-clockwise in a restored position. Our data from the Bitterwater and Doornpoort formations overlie directly on top of these earlier results from Sinclair area, as well as the published data from Kalahari. So what's interesting about that is, and I don't have time to get into all these data, but if you look at our complete data set, which was from the Rehoboth area, which is not just the data which I've showed you, but also we sampled Zwartkopjes dikes at their type locality, and also some other dikes around Rehoboth and the Usip River. And if we look at what to me was a previously mystifying result from 1975 from John Piper, where all of these data define an array of points that if you apply this rotation to the Rehoboth region, unlike in the present day configuration where they're kind of all over the place relative to our blue and red reference poles, if you apply this rotation, all the poles are explicable in terms of combinations of 1100 million year sin-folding magnetizations that I described, as well as some dikes that in the Zwartkopjes area that may have been remagnetized during Damaran time in the Cambrian, as well as this Rehoboth dike right outside of the township may be a remagnetization, or it's possible that that dike itself is about 550 million years old. And Piper's data, very importantly, also restore on top of the Grafwater Formation near Cape Town as a Cambrian to Ordovician boundary paleopole. And that's important because that suggests that this rotation happened right or at least after about 500 million years. So the suggestion is that I've got three implications. One is that the Doornpoort Formation does correlate with the Aubrus Formation and also is about 1100 million years in age, because it would have to be older than this sin folding result. The folding event occurred at around 1100 million years in both the Sinclair and the Rehoboth areas, and it's concurrent with the deposition of these red beds, and that the Rehoboth microplate rotation clockwise should have occurred at least younger than the late Cambrian to account for that Piper pole. So I suggest that it occurred at the end of the Damaran orogeny. The implications of this, one is this questionable pre-Damaran folding event, and one farm where we were not able to contact the owners to get access is the area around Versailles, east of Rehoboth Township, and we're looking to the northeast down plunge, and there is an angular unconformity of the Compsas formation, which should be pre-Nama sandstones overlaying unconformably folded Durnport formation. And it's the question of, is this like a tectonic orogenic folding event, or is this block rotation? We will see with further study. The other option I just want to explore here, the Naukluft naps in this aeromagnetic image from Lehman et al. The Naukluft naps would be right around here and the left lower corner of this image. We can imagine just some very simple thought experiments of how this rotation may have happened. It may have happened with a very lengthy Rehoboth in domain block that started off in this configuration as a big lever, and then at the end of Damaran deformation rotated clockwise. At the same time, there was shortening in the Ganzi-Chobe belt. Or you can imagine that the lever is a little bit shorter. So instead of 200 kilometers of shortening, we might imagine only about 100 kilometers of shortening in the Ganzi-Chobe belt. That might be more realistic. Or we can consider another end member, as the Rehoboth may have been rotating as little ball bearings or hockey pucks within an overall dextral regime, rotating clockwise. In which case, if you make this physical connection to the Ganzi-Chobe belt, then it doesn't need to have be related to the shortening event there. Of course, the shortening would have occurred, but it doesn't necessarily have to be related to this late stage. And in terms of this final model, I note that some detailed structural studies in the Klein-Ob area from the 1980s do show, in fact, I'll just point you to the caption, right lateral strike slip faulting has caused dragging and folding of the beds and clockwise rotation of fault-bounded blocks. This is at hectometer scale. We may have this kind of deformation happening all throughout the Rehoboth. And I think further study hopefully will elucidate among these various options. So I thank you for your attention and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. Just a reminder for everybody to keep questions for David and our next talk that are live until after the last talk, because they will not be able to answer questions in the chat. So our next talk is by Ben Mapani.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see so many of you. I'll try and share my screen. We can go, all right. Can you see my screen? Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we are. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.